Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. The distance was almost nothing. From the tram terminus to Betty Shanks's family home, the walk should have taken only a few minutes. It was a familiar route through a familiar Brisbane neighborhood. But on the night of September 19, 1952, Betty disappeared somewhere along that short stretch. By sunrise, she had become the victim of one of Queensland's most enduring unsolved murders. Her full name was Betty Thomson Shanks. She was 23 years old. A university graduate and a public servant. Those details matter because they give us a clearer picture of her life. Betty was educated, employed, and still living with her parents. On that Friday evening, there was nothing to suggest she believed herself to be in danger. Her plans were ordinary: attend a lecture, take the tram, and walk home. Brisbane in 1952 was a city in transition. The Second World War had ended only 7 years earlier. And suburban life was spreading outward along tram lines and main roads. Public transport was part of the daily rhythm. People walked between tram stops and their homes at night, often along streets that were quieter and darker than they are today. That was normal, not necessarily reckless. Betty attended an evening lecture before beginning her journey back toward the family home. Investigators would later reconstruct those final movements with intense care. Tracing where she had been and when she had left, nothing about her behavior stood out. She had not announced plans to meet anyone afterward. As far as her family understood, she was simply coming home at the end of the evening. The crucial confirmed sighting came at the Days Road tram terminus. Betty was seen leaving there at approximately 9:32 that night. From the terminus, she set out on foot. Her destination was close, and the neighborhood was not some unknown place. She knew the route. If everything had gone normally, she would have reached her front door before anyone had reason to wonder where she was. But Betty did not arrive, and now here's where the timeline becomes deeply unsettling. Before 10 o'clock, several people living nearby heard screams. In isolation, a sound in the night can be difficult to interpret. People hesitate. They wonder whether it came from a quarrel, an animal, or somewhere farther away. Only later did those residents understand that what they heard may have marked Betty's final moments. The reports of screaming helped narrow the likely window of the attack. Betty had left the terminus at 9:32. The sounds were heard before 10. That means whatever happened probably unfolded quickly within minutes of her stepping off the tram. There was no long unexplained absence first, no journey across the city. She vanished almost at the edge of home. So let's back up a second and consider what her parents knew. They were expecting their daughter. The tram journey and walk were routine enough that a small delay may not initially have seemed alarming, but time passed and Betty still did not come through the door. Concern turned into fear. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, her parents contacted police and reported her missing. That decision came only a few hours after Betty had last been seen, but those hours were critical. In 1952, there were no mobile phones, location records, doorbell cameras, or widespread surveillance systems. A missing person's movements had to be rebuilt through memory: who saw her, which tram she took when it arrived, and whether anyone noticed another person nearby. The first search took place in darkness. Police and concerned residents had to examine streets, yards, pathways, and vacant areas with limited light. The route was short, which should have made the task simple. Yet a suburban street can conceal more than it seems to, especially at night. Hedges, fences, shadowed gardens, and the uneven sight lines between houses can hide something only a few steps away. At 5:35 the following morning, an off-duty police officer made the discovery. Betty's body was lying in a nearby front garden, roughly 150 meters from the Days Road terminus. She had been close to the point where she began walking and close to the safety she had expected to reach. Dawn had revealed what the nighttime search had missed. The violence inflicted on Betty was severe. She had been beaten, kicked, and strangled. Those findings indicated a sustained physical assault rather than a single impulsive blow. Still, the evidence did not provide investigators with an obvious reason for it. Her jewelry had not been taken. Her handbag was also left behind. If robbery had been the purpose, the attacker had ignored the most visible valuables. That absence of an obvious motive immediately complicated the inquiry. Was Betty targeted personally, or had an unknown attacker encountered her by chance? Did someone intend to rob her and then panic, leaving everything? Was the assault driven by anger, control, or some motive never visible to investigators? Each possibility suggested a different kind of offender. And the physical scene did not offer a simple answer. There's also the question that has followed the case ever since. Did Betty know the person who attacked her? A familiar person might have approached without causing immediate alarm. But the short route also created an opportunity for a stranger. Someone could have watched the tram arrive, followed her from the terminus, or crossed paths with her on the street. The known facts allow for several scenarios, but confirm none of them. The location in a front garden is equally difficult to interpret. It was not a remote bushland site or a deliberately hidden grave. Betty was found within a residential area, where houses stood nearby and people could hear sounds from the street. That suggests the attacker either acted with startling recklessness or believed darkness and speed would provide enough protection. The entire crime may have lasted only minutes. Police launched an extensive investigation. Detectives interviewed people connected to Betty and questioned residents throughout the surrounding area. They sought passengers, tram workers, neighbors, and anyone who might have been on the streets that evening. The challenge was separating meaningful observations from ordinary nighttime activity. A person walking nearby might be crucial, completely uninvolved, or simply remembered inaccurately after news of the murder spread. Witness memory is especially fragile when people do not realize they are witnessing part of a crime. A face glimpsed near a tram stop may not seem important at the time. A vehicle passing through the area may be forgotten by morning. Once investigators begin asking questions, memories can sharpen, but they can also shift. Details heard from neighbors or newspapers may become mixed with what someone truly observed. The screams created another layer of uncertainty. Several people heard them, but hearing a scream does not tell you precisely where it came from, who made it, or what was happening. Sound travels unpredictably between buildings and across quiet streets. Investigators could use those reports to establish a general period, but not to identify an attacker. The neighborhood had heard the crime without necessarily seeing it. News of Betty's death spread quickly, and public attention intensified. A young woman had been killed within a few minutes of home, on a route that must have felt safe because it was so ordinary. That circumstance disturbed people far beyond her neighborhood. It forced families to reconsider late tram journeys and short walks they had previously taken for granted. If this could happen there, people wondered, where did safety begin? But intense public attention can complicate a murder inquiry as much as it assists one. Police receive rumors, theories, accusations, and supposed sightings. People may report a relative behaving strangely or a neighbor who once made an unsettling comment. Every credible lead has to be checked, yet suspicion is not evidence. A person who appears evasive may simply be frightened, private, or afraid of becoming publicly associated with the case. Then there were the confessions. Over the years, several people falsely claimed responsibility for Betty's murder. That might sound extraordinary, but false confessions appear in many prominent cases. Some people seek attention. Others are experiencing mental illness, guilt about unrelated acts, or a desire to insert themselves into a famous investigation. A confession matters only if it matches evidence that was never publicly known and can be independently verified. In Betty's case, those claims did not lead to an arrest. Investigators had to test each one against the established timeline, the location, and the condition of the scene. If a supposed confessor could not provide accurate private details or could be placed somewhere else, the claim collapsed. Each false lead consumed time while also raising brief hope that the mystery had finally been solved. For Betty's parents, that cycle must have been especially painful. Their daughter had left for an evening lecture and was expected home shortly afterward. Instead, they spent the early morning reporting her missing, waiting for information, and then confronting the worst possible outcome. Public fascination can turn a victim into a name attached to a mystery, but behind that name was a family whose ordinary life ended in a single night. It is important, too, not to let the brutality of the crime become the whole story of Betty. She was more than the circumstances in which she was found. She had completed university, entered public service, and was continuing her education through an evening lecture. At 23, her adult life was only beginning. The route home was supposed to be the final, uneventful part of a productive day. No one was arrested. That fact does not mean police had no suspects or no theories. Major investigations often examine many people who can never be publicly identified as offenders. It means the available evidence never reached the threshold required for a charge. Suspicion, however strong, cannot substitute for proof. And as the years passed, witnesses aged, memories faded, and potential physical evidence became more difficult to use. Modern forensic science naturally raises another question. Could evidence preserved from 1952 now produce a result? Advances in genetic testing have solved cases that once seemed impossible. But that depends entirely on what material still exists, how it was collected, whether it was contaminated, and whether it can be linked reliably to the crime. Technology cannot recover evidence that was never preserved or no longer survives. The case also predates many of the investigative tools now considered standard. There was no computerized database connecting similar offenses across jurisdictions. Records were kept on paper. Comparing one suspicious incident with another could require detectives to know about it personally or request files from elsewhere. That does not diminish the work of the original investigators. It shows the limits of the system available to them. And still, the geography keeps pulling us back. 150 meters from the terminus, a few minutes on foot, screams before 10, a family waiting nearby. The smallness of that distance is what makes the case so haunting. Betty was not lost across a vast city. She was intercepted during a narrow window between public transport and her own front. Queensland police continue to list Betty Shanks' murder as unsolved, with a reward available for information leading to a conviction. That continued listing matters. It signals that the case has not been formally forgotten and that useful information could still exist outside police files. Someone may have heard a confession, recognized suspicious behavior, or inherited knowledge that an earlier generation was unwilling to share. After more than 7 decades. Even secondhand information must be treated carefully. Stories change as they are passed between people, but a name, an object, a diary entry, or a specific account could still direct investigators toward evidence capable of verification. Old cases are sometimes solved not by one dramatic revelation, but by a small fact that connects previously separate pieces of the record. So the central question remains painfully simple. Who was close to the day's road terminus after 9:32 on the night of September 19, 1952? Was the attacker waiting, following, or encountered by chance? Why was Betty subjected to such violence when her jewelry and handbag were left behind? The answers may once have been known to only one person, but secrets rarely exist in perfect isolation. Betty's last journey was measured in minutes, not miles. She attended a lecture, boarded a tram, stepped off, and began walking home. Somewhere within that 150-meter stretch, an ordinary Friday night became a crime scene. The investigation that followed was enormous, but the missing piece never emerged. Until it does, Betty Thomson Shanks remains remembered not only as the victim of an unsolved murder, but as a young woman still waiting for justice. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.